10th. Finance and Revenue Committee meeting is 7:02. We're running a half hour late this particular time. Any comments, suggestions, petitions by residents in attendance regarding items not on the agenda? Please come forward and state your name and your address, please.
Certainly. My name's Nicole Frizzato. I'm the Chester County Solicitor.
I need to write down the spelling of your name, please.
Absolutely. Forzato. That's fair. I did give a card.
Thank you very much.
Sure. My address, the work address is 313 East Market Street in Westchester, Pennsylvania.
Please tell us what you would like us to know.
Certainly. The county purchased 313 on April 1st of 2021. On May 10th, 2021, the County Board of Assessment Appeals received the county's application to have the property deemed tax exempt. A hearing was held. Property was granted tax exempt status. As a result of that, I reached out to Kristen Camp on behalf of the county to ask that for an exoneration of the taxes of approximately $76,000. What that is from April 1st to the end of the year. So the county recognizes when it was not in tax exempt status, we would pay that tax bill. But once it was owned by the county, we would be seeking exoneration from that point forward because we were granted tax exemption status.
Thank you very much. Can you send the information you are requesting us to consider electronically to the Westchester Borough Manager?
Certainly.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. County would be asking, yeah, we would just be asking not, we haven't paid it yet, but yes, it would be exoneration of that. Correct. Yes.
Comments very brief.
Can you tell us who you are and where you live?
Yes, Mike Reese, 706 South Walnut Street. So I just wanted to bring just an awareness that we are in the process of forming a Friends of Baird Rustin group with obviously some local residents. Aaron has joined me this evening as well. The reason that we wanted to take a few moments of your time, not only to make you aware of that, but we were informed that there is some funding, some ARP funding that may be available in the coming year. And obviously we are in its infancy. As I mentioned, we are in the process of forming that, that group. But I am sure that we will work towards vetting events, activities, beautification. So several things will be on the kind of on the docket for us to think through, and at some point I am sure that we will be coming back before you and potentially with some asks of funding towards maybe some of those causes. But really it was just a matter of letting you know that it is something that is in the process of being formed, and the probably most important aspect is understanding what the proper protocol will be come that time. For requests that may come your way.
Obviously, we can't discuss what you're talking about based on it not being on the agenda, but as you move forward through the process, contact the Director of Parks.
Yep.
And he'll be able to tell you what to do.
Absolutely. No, appreciate it and brief, and thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Scott.
We are, yes.
Mr. Perone, make a ruling, please.
Make the ruling.
Okay.
vote here.
Well, the new state law represents the fact that we're not allowed to interact a conversation with the items that are not on the agenda.
I'm just
Okay?
asking them a
Completely okay
question.
with me.
No, we're not supposed to do that.
When I'm supposed to ask them questions,
No.
people stand up like that? Yeah, I challenge that ruling. Vote, 1, 2, let's go. That's your job, take a
Okay.
vote.
So Mr. Scott says we take a vote.
I haven't read the law personally. Is that an accurate assessment of that, Mr. Perrin?
And I wouldn't call this an emergency either. So.
We'll move forward. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reese.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Largus?
Eric Lorgus, 117 East Biddle Street. I'd like to get that law clarified because it doesn't make any sense to me that someone cannot discuss something that's not on the agenda. I believe what the law may be trying to achieve is that something cannot be decided that is not on the agenda, that you can't take action. Do you think that's a more logical?
Thank you, Mr. Largus. We have to move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can't respond to him at all.
No.
How can I look up the text of this?
Mr. Mayor?
Does anyone know what it's called?
Thank you. I just think it is an important point. Why is there an agenda item for public and comments for things that aren't on the agenda? You can't, if the public can't come up and comment and talk about something that's not on the agenda, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I got it. It's probably a good idea because I mean, sometimes things do come up and they might not necessarily be that you really need to take to the next committee meeting. So it just seems silly to say,
Mr. Mayor, I
can't ask questions.
Mr. Mayor, unfortunately, it's a gray area. But it's in the statute that Mr. Perone actually sent us an email
Yeah.
with the law on it, and it pretty much said that.
Okay.
So
I
it
would
came
ask
from Harrisburg.
I would
so-
ask that you get clarification from
Yeah.
the attorney because it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I think it's for the government not to bring stuff up randomly when they knew it's going to be in order to stimulate the public. I don't think it's there in its spirit to stop anyone from coming up during public comment.
By Tuesday? No, by tomorrow night. By tomorrow night, in the event that something does happen, because this is always on the agenda, I'm sure Mr. Perone and Mr. Metric will have a clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you, because we do have the law, okay? And it's not that I'm trying to be rude, I'm just trying to do what's right. Okay, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Can I just make
Mr. Allen,
a
please.
suggestion that we can just email each other the law and we can read it instead of just debating it without having just read it? So we could,
See, I read it 3 months ago and I understood it, because at the end of August is when this thing went into effect. And, we pretty much, stuck by the way it was written. But by tomorrow night, because we have a meeting again tomorrow night, no, today's Wednesday, next Tuesday. No, I kept thinking, I have my days screwed up.
Can they ask you that out of the new law? That you need?
I thought today was Tuesday, but it's actually Wednesday. So next Tuesday, Mr. Perone and Mr. Metric will have everything pretty much cleared up for everyone. I'm sure they'll send you the law as well. Yeah, so if you find a loophole in there and someone's still here, thank you. Moving on to number 3, Mr. Bikram from PFM Pension Management 2021 Quarter Review, Multi-Asset Class Management. Thank you.
Thank you. It's actually good to be here. Good to be in person. It's been quite some time. But yeah, good to see some familiar faces. Everyone should have a copy of the report. It's also available on the screen. So my plan here is to review actually the results for the third quarter, just given where we are in the year. The fact that we're in November, I felt that it would be more timely to review the results as of the end of September. And then, of course, provide some context as to where markets are and where our investment committee is thinking, or what they're thinking, rather, as we round out 2021, which is very, very hard to believe. But with that, we can start with the executive summary, which is on page 1.1. So if we go on, perfect, thank you. So just a general summary of market performance. When we think about the third quarter of 2021, we actually saw an end result that we haven't really seen in about 15 months, and that is negative results, negative returns out of broad domestic equity and international equity indices, really across the board. That being said, those negative returns were marginal, relatively speaking, but we just haven't seen those numbers in a good period of time. So what drove the volatility that we saw at the tail end? Going back to the third quarter, thinking about July, August, we really had strong months in the equity markets as the economic recovery continued. But as September came and as headlines developed, there were a couple drivers that inserted some angst among investors that really precipitated the sell-off. And first was the fact that the Fed, for the first time in a real way, made statements around the fact that they were ready to start to tighten policy. If we think back to March, April of 2020, there's been unprecedented policy stimulus, both from the Fed as well as Congress and the administration, just to stabilize the economy and to drive growth. And so, there's also a risk of allowing easy policy to continue for too long. And so there was, for the first time in a real way, some decisiveness around starting to tighten. So you couple that with the fact that, we were dealing with rising COVID cases during the period, stubbornly high inflation, which we just got a read today, in excess of 6%, and kind of round all of that out with some international headlines out of China. When you think about Evergrande and being the largest real estate development company in the country, and the company really at risk of defaulting on their debt, it just inserted, like I mentioned, angst and uncertainty. So we saw the market sell off. You can see, though, for the quarter, the S&P 500, broad measure of the 500 largest companies in the U.S. market, did end up about flat, 0.5%, for the quarter. When we take a look at mid-cap and small-cap companies, as defined by the Russell 2500 Index, 2500 and 2000, you can see some negative results for the quarter. when we shift our eyes down to international markets, and I think that that's a little bit more telling as to the impact of what happened in China, and see international economies down about, international markets rather, down about 3%, emerging markets down 8%. So if you think about emerging markets, China makes up 50% of the emerging markets index. It was down 20%. So there, you know. So that's the story as of the third quarter. Fortunately, when we take a look at the portfolios, they ended up about flat. So really didn't gain much, but didn't lose much. And we've really seen a tremendous rebound out of markets into the fourth quarter. So domestic equities actually, as of yesterday, are up over 9%. International equities are up over 3.5%, about 3.8%. To be more accurate around that. And a lot of that growth actually coming from developed countries as they start to get a hold of their COVID containment and start to open up their economies. Granted, areas like Germany are still struggling and it is a bit fragmented, but they're starting to reopen. So we've continued to see some positive momentum into the fourth quarter. And then when we think about fixed income markets, they've started to continue to claw back. They're up about 50 basis points so far this quarter. If you look at the year-to-date number for fixed income, down about 1.5% year-to-date. If you think about fixed income as an asset class, rates rose pretty precipitously at the outset of the year, about 70 basis points across the yield curve. We saw fixed income come down to about negative 3.5%. So it's really spent the rest of the year clawing back. But that being said, you know, we still believe that fixed income plays a role in the underweight fixed income, but we still feel that an allocation makes sense. So from a broad economic perspective, you know, what are we seeing? First and foremost, we're seeing improved COVID data. You know, cases are coming down, economies are reopening. We're seeing more guidance as it relates to booster shots. We're seeing additional members of the population, specifically children, being able to now get vaccinations if you know, their parents so choose to have them get them. So access to vaccinations are increasing. You know, we're seeing continued strength in labor markets. So unemployment is down about 4.6%. We're starting to see areas of wage inflation, and sectors, specifically hotel and leisure, really had a strong month this past month. You know, and when we think about tapering and tightening, Fed has made their decision to start to tighten. Markets haven't really reacted to it. You know, we see that it's been priced in. And so what we really see as the risk when it comes to the tightening of policy is really going to be implementation. So, you know, does the Fed execute their tightening process in line with market expectations? Are they too aggressive based on economic data? That's really what may spark volatility and uncertainty in the marketplace. But to the degree that tightening happens in line with expectation, we actually don't expect too much reaction out of the market. I think really the big headline and the big point to discuss is really kind of just what we're seeing in the supply chain with inflation. So, you know, seeing a 6+% read today, the highest inflation rate since 1990. You know, that's you know, something not, you know, certainly not to ignore. The one thing that I will say is that we do see it in the data that much of the inflation number is transitory in nature. But that being said, transitory just means temporary, doesn't mean it's going away overnight. I mean, we've seen elevated numbers of CPI month over month over month. Granted, you know, we're comparing it to 12 months ago, but we weren't as close as we were in April of this year. And so when you start to parse out the basket of goods, you know, you can see certainly the impact of new and used car prices and the impact to CPI. You can see areas of energy and the impact to CPI. And so, you know, we expect once these transitory factors subside and abate anywhere, you know, 12 to 18 months, depending on who you ask, that inflation will still be higher than what we've seen historically. Expect it to be above the 2% number that we've seen, you know, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. You know, but that being said, you know, we continue to keep an eye on it. We continue to watch markets, and you know, if it starts to get out of control, of course, we'll continue to monitor the portfolio and take necessary actions. But we have made some changes to the portfolio, which I'm going to get into now, to hedge for inflation and some of the other factors. So if we go to the next page, I think first and foremost, to just hit on performance, the police pension plan and the non-uniform pension plan, you can see performance for the quarter about flat, down about 0.5%. Looking at year-to-date numbers as of the third quarter, about 7.5% return year-to-date, and that is with the sell-off in September. As we take a look at where the portfolios lie as of yesterday, the balance of the police pension fund is about $47.9 million. So about another 4.5% return, which would bring the year-to-date number to about 12% or so. And then the non-uniform fund is at $25.4 million. Once again, a similar growth rate when we think about return into the fourth quarter. So what have we done over the last couple months to structure the portfolio in the context of this environment? So first and foremost, when we think about low interest rates, we've done a couple things. First, we remain underweight fixed income. We don't feel that being at target or overweight fixed income in a low rate environment makes sense. There's too much risk for rates to rise. Secondly, we've also added areas added allocations that provide income. So we've added preferred equity, public real estate into the portfolio to provide additional yield in light of low rates. To hedge for inflation, we have added an allocation to commodities through a PIMCO strategy. And we've also found ways to de-risk the portfolio, given how lengthy this recovery has been. We just want to manage risk, earn return, but make sure that we're managing the risk to capture that return. So we were overweight small caps for a period of time. We have removed that overweight. And actually, we are tilting now more toward large caps, higher quality oriented companies, still to capture that equity return. But, we feel being down on the risk spectrum in small caps doesn't necessarily make sense at this juncture. So that's broadly what we've done from an allocation perspective. And you can see that these changes have taken place over a series of months: August, September, October, November, earlier in the year, in June when we added public REITs, et cetera. And then just broadly, just to touch on current positioning, see that we are domestic equities relative to target. But once again, what's captured in there, the preferred equity allocation is captured there. The convertibles allocation is captured in there, and the higher quality allocations of domestic equity. You can see that we're about target for international markets, which in light of, once again, the fragmented nature of their recovery, we feel it makes sense. And we have an allocation to public real estate, inflation hedge securities by way of commodities. And then, as I mentioned, we're on fixed income at this juncture.
A word that I keep hearing that I admittedly do not fully understand is tapering. Does this just refer to interest rates, or is there anything else in tapering?
Yeah, so when you think about tapering, what the Fed is referring to in this instance is they've done two things. They've taken two actions, or took two actions, I should say, last year. First is that they made a commitment to purchase treasuries and mortgage-backed securities in the fixed income market, about $120 billion a month, to inject liquidity in the fixed income market and allow the markets to operate and function normal. But now when you look at the fixed income market and you look at the economy, we are in a more normal place relative to last year. And so the need to continue to purchase securities and flood the market with cash is not necessary. And so when they taper, they're basically saying, right now their plan is $15 billion per month that they're going to reduce. So they'll go 5 and then 90, et cetera, et cetera. They may change that number, but that is what they're referring to right now. When it comes to interest rates, they lowered interest rates as well as part of the tools that they utilized last year. They do intend to start to raise interest rates, but the plan right now is not until late 2022. So we expect to see short-term interest rates anchored at, pretty much 0% until then. Of course, economic data can change that plan, but that's the plan as of now.
So in addition to, if I could summarize the first half of that, they're just buying debt and they're going to buy less debt.
That's correct.
Okay. And then you briefly mentioned if things get out of control, what does that look like more tangibly?
Yeah. I mean, you're already seeing a 6+% number, so how much more out of control? Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that if we start to take a look at the CPI numbers, the inflation numbers, and they end up being more structural and permanent in nature, as opposed to looking at the basket dissecting the data and understanding that some of the drivers of CPI and elevated CPI are more temporary. So right now, and I'll give a prime example, you take a look at trucks and the availability of trucks. Capacity of 18-wheelers in the States right now is at 100%. There's no extra 18-wheeler to carry containers or material at this point. So you have all these ships sitting out at sea, have ports that are crowded, right? Because it all cascades. So that we see as temporary in nature. But once that starts to normalize, we should see that impact to inflation come. If that becomes permanent, well, then there could be a different effect.
Mr. Scott? When you say, I get a couple different things. When you say normalize, that's not going to happen for a while.
It's not going to happen.
2023. Your
Well,
best guess?
For
Boats are sitting out there and there's
Yeah.
nobody to unload them.
Yeah, for inflation, that is so. I will say it depends on whose research you read. I have read.
I got yours.
You're fair enough. I've seen anywhere from 12 to 18 months as it relates to these supply side constraints to normalize.
Wow, okay.
So
That's what my guess was, but
yeah,
I like you on the record on that.
that's fair.
When the managers do changes in allocations, is there a fee charged to the
For the portfolios.
portfolio?
Yeah, so when our investment committee makes a decision to add a new manager to the portfolio, terminate a manager, or even reallocate to de-risk portfolios, the only fee that is charged is a fee to execute the transaction by your custodian. I don't know what that fee is, but that would be the only fee. There's no fee that's charged by PFM.
Okay, and the only other question I have is towards the end of the fourth quarter, they normally have the Santa sell-off where people just start unloading, like the end of this month. How's that going to affect the pension and the police and the public works people?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Bernie. I mean, yeah, historically there's sort of right, retail investors trying to manage their taxes and whatnot toward the tail end of the year. You see some more volume in the markets, et cetera. So as always, with our investment committee, they're continuously monitoring the markets. Our research team is always monitoring asset classes and trends within the asset classes and data coming. If there's ever a need to de-risk the portfolio or go underweight equities because we're seeing more than the normal degree of volatility or turnover, we will certainly move out of equities and move into more conservative asset classes, be it fixed income or cash. As you recall, we did that last year. And so that's when we take a look at the portfolio and the investment policy enables us to and gives us the latitude to conservative asset classes if we need to. So to answer your question, I mean, if we see the broad market sell off, I mean, we will always do our best to try to protect client capital. Some instances we do it better at it than in other instances. But we will always try to, be prudent and maintain posture.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Mr. Allen, you good? Okay, Mr. Scott? Thank you very much, Becker.
Thank you. Appreciate it
All right, have a nice holiday.
as well.
Bye. Okay, moving on to number 4, considering approving an increase from $15 to $50 for a fee $50 for a fee charge for the sewer and stream protection certificate.
Good evening, Will Williams, Sustainability Director. Anyone who wants to buy, sell, or refinance a home, borough needs to get these certifications for, it's beyond the borough, county taxes, borough sewer, stream protection fee. They also get one for Portnoy. Right now we're charging $15 for that, and we feel like we're kind of giving away. So we'd like to raise that fee to help offset the staff costs associated with doing those. I think this year has been a little different real estate wise, especially with all the refis, but we've been doing about 25 to 35, between 30 and 40 a month. I think a normal year, normal month is maybe 25 a month. But, aggregated, multiplied by 2, there's potentially a lot of revenue. But we looked around at other municipalities. Some are charging less than us. Some charge a lot more. Lower Marion charges $100. West Whiteland charges, I think, $40. So the $50 rate we came up with, just trying to figure out how much time we're spending on them and who's doing them. And we arrived at the $50 number. So any questions?
I'll look over to Mr. Allen first.
My question with fee increases is always why, and I understand. And my biggest question was going to be if you looked at, like an hourly rate for what y'all
Yeah.
are working on. So
Yeah.
as long as that's taken into account, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's how we arrived at the number. We looked at who's doing them and how long they take and how many we're doing.
Okay, Mr. Allen, good. Mr. Scott?
Well, they're requested a lot of different ways, and I should have mentioned this earlier. We want to kind of revamp the system a little too to make it easier for everyone involved. Right now, they come in phone calls, emails, in the mail, and we want to move it all to an electronic request system based on the website. So someone goes on, they fill out the form, it goes directly to the staff who's doing them. Hopefully, at some point in the future, have online pay. So we're also doing them now before we actually cash the check. And sometimes they come in last minute and, settlements today, and they didn't know they needed it. So we're doing it without the check in hand. So we want to move it eventually to online. Saves a ton of paper and time internally, and better service for the search companies doing the work. Yep. Right. So they come in and it's buyer, seller, settlement date, everything, and then we have to go in, check their accounts, put in a history of their payments, calculate late fees, things like that. So they're fairly time consuming, and every once in a while you get a weird one, and it can take hours to sort out a really weird one. Yes. And refinances.
Thank you very much. We have a 3-0 moving forward to council. Moving on to number 5, right? Yes, approve the resolution to appoint the borough manager, which one? As the application agent for the Pennsylvania Tropical Storm Ida DR 4618 FEMA relief. I choose Mr. Metric.
Well, we have Mr. Perone on there as of now because we need to file this relatively within the time frame of 2021. That's why we have Mr. Perone on there.
Well, when does this expire? Because he's only 35 days.
Well, our plan is to, once this resolution is approved by council, that we would get this filed with fees as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen, any problem with it? Mr. Scott? Yeah. I chose. But we'd have to do it twice. There you go. Barb, what do you recommend? Leave it
We
as
can
it is?
certainly change it to Mr. Metric, but
And it'll be voted on by next week, right?
yes.
Okay, because today's Wednesday. I thought today was Tuesday. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. All right, number 6. I put this on the agenda because I wanted to give kudos, number 1, to the Financial Ad Hoc Committee. What's happened now as far as our ordinance is concerned, a couple things have happened. Number 1, the team has dropped down below 5 people. The, it says here, not less than 5 people. 3 people have resigned, and Mr. Eric Wilcom is serving as on the the pension board. So they're down to 4 people. It's number 1. I'm calling it, it's time to sunset the committee because they attained all the items that we requested. And council adopted almost every one of their positions. For example, information, the sale of the wastewater system, transfer dispatch to county 911, studying staffing in the police department, trash and recycling, tax increase to fund, capital reserves, and general fund. And they did the pension board. So they did everything that we asked them to do. So they're below their minimum members on the board. And by sunsetting the 2021 committee, the new council next year can adopt a 2022 committee if they feel that we need it. So I'm asking committee to allow the 2021 ad hoc committee to be sunset. Scott. What we did was Eric Wilcombs was on the ad hoc committee, and we appointed him to the pension committee. That's all pension.
What others?
Just this financial ad hoc committee. We're sunset and then bring it back up in 2022. Our committee thinks it's necessary, yeah. We may have new ideas for next year that we just appoint, new people, apply and then move forward. Okay. Mr. Allen, you okay with it?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I love what a lot of what the committee did. Just as a quick question related to that, do we know when we expect to hear back from PFM about the sewer study?
Mr. Perone?
Yeah, we're going to discuss that in an executive session next week.
It's okay. I did not take a Claritin before the meeting today. I should have. So, next Tuesday, correct?
Tuesday and Wednesday.
It's my birthday.
6 o'clock with hots.
I'll bring you a cupcake. There you go. All right, moving on to next Tuesday and Wednesday, we have an executive session. 6 p.m.
Each day?
Yes. All right. All right, moving on to number 7, October 2021 financials. Ms. Leonti.
We start with page 1, please. So looking at the Treasury report for the month of October, we started the month with $18,015,650 in cash. We brought in $3,276,432 in receipts, and we spent $3,105,917. This left us with an ending cash balance of $18,186,165. It's also important to note that of this $18 million cash number, about $11.6 million is restricted cash. So this leaves us with just about $6.5 million in cash for general operations. Going over to page 2. For the month of October, we brought in revenues of $1,686,772. Had actual expense of $2,158,672. This left us with a net loss for the month of $471,900. Going over to page 3, for the year ended October 31st, had actual revenues of $27,870,367. Actual expenses of $23,361,841. This left us in a positive position for the year ended by $4,508,526. Looking at the year-to-date ended October 31st, we're starting to come into a better position where we can make projections where we're going to land for the year. At this point in time, we are projecting that general fund revenues will not meet budget by about $247,000. This is mainly in the police violation of ordinances of $86,000, police alarms of $29,000, restitution of $17,000, and building permits of $115,000. On the expense side, we are also projecting expenses over appropriations in certain line items, mainly in the police overtime line item budget. We're projecting that to be over by about $45,000. The public works service contract line item, $20,000. Equipment repairs, $20,000, and bank fees, $19,000, for a total of $104,000. We do have some positive variances within our revenue line items. Deed transfer tax is doing really well at this point in time. We're projecting that this line item will be over budget by year end. And we also have a positive variance in our the refund that we receive from our health insurance carrier. So at this point in time, based on the information that we have, we are projecting a net loss for the year. And again, that's just based on the revenues that are coming in and the expenses that we are seeing. It could change, based on what EIT comes in. That's still trailing budget a little bit through October, but we do expect November to pick up as it usually does when the quarters end and employers file their tax returns. Real estate taxes are looking to make budget, so we're good there. At this point in time, we could see a net loss within the general fund.
So as we look at as we sit now looking into December, right? The end of the year, we're looking at a possibility of a net loss.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. How deep is the hole, would you think?
At this point in time, it could be anywhere. At this point in time, I'm projecting about $120,000 net loss.
Okay, so using my crystal ball, looking into 2022, we have a net loss of that amount, and we need to start the next year roughly 2.5 million. We're back where we were in 2020, correct? Much?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen?
The D transfer, do we know, is there like a rough estimate as to how far ahead of budget we're expecting to be?
We're projecting it could be around $160,000 over budget.
And the health insurance?
At this point in time, we're about $74,000.
And then does this include, we got some favorable news over in our parking committee yesterday. Does that include, like, were we talking about increasing the transfer to the general fund as a result of that? Or does that include that?
No, that amount has already been budgeted. The amount that was discussed last night, the
Okay.
$1.7 million,
Okay.
that's already included in
So
the
that
22
rough
budget.
projection of like 120 in the whole includes that?
Well, the 1.7 is for 2022, excuse me, but
Okay.
there may be some additional monies that we could transfer from parking into general fund to help with this.
Okay, cool. Great.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Allen. We did transfer 1.5 million, correct? If I'm right?
Correct, that's what-
From parking into the
That
general
was the
fund.
budgeted amount, yes, that's
Yeah,
correct.
okay, thank you. Mr. Scott? Thank you very much, Ms. Leonti. Moving on to number 8. Review the 2022 preliminary budget, 5-year capital plan, ARPA funding plan. That's going to be handled by Mr. Metrick. Oh, and Barb. Oh. Okay,
If
great.
we could start on page
Thank you.
2, please. I'm just looking at the summary of changes that have been made since last month's presentation. Looking at the general fund, we Had a total reduction of $78,000, both on the revenue and expense side. Looking at the left-hand side first, at the revenues, we decreased our state aid revenue budgeted number by $100,000, and this was to make the line item more in line with the remittance that we received this year. We also reduced the recreation revenue and expenses by $23,000 for a reduction in the food truck festival, which was originally the restaurant festival, but based on what the staffing is within the department and what they can do at this point in time, we've reduced both the revenue and expenses to reflect that. Also, we increased revenues on the recreation fund for capital projects for $45,000. This is in reference to the Marshall Square Park project that was budgeted in 2021, but is not expected to be complete this year. So we're going to earmark the cash that we had set aside in the budget for this year. We're going to put that into next year's reserve for cash, and then spend the money on the funds next year. Looking on the expense side, on the right-hand side, as we discussed last month, there was significant savings that we recognized in the health insurance premiums. We originally had an 8% increase in health insurance in the budget, but we were able, based on the information that we got from the carrier, we were able to reduce that to 0%. So we reduced the health insurance premiums by $175,000. Also decreased the police double time budget by $10,000. That's based on contractual changes in the AFSCME contract. And we also reduced the enterprise leasing payments down by almost $7,000. And that was based on when we would be receiving the vehicles. Obviously, we're not going to be receiving them all January 1st, that it would be, a couple months out. So with those three big line items that we were able to reduce, we were able to put back in the funding for the police MVR of $11,000, as well as the AED replacements for $10,000, and vehicle upfitting for the public works vehicles, the enterprise leases for $50,500. And there were also a couple other line items that we put back into the budget that were originally not in there. Tools and safety under the Public Works Department of $10,000. We added some training into the administration budget. That's for all of the departments within the first, for parking, not parking, recreation, housing, and finance, and IT. And then we also added the $4,500 back into the mowing contract. That's to extend the cuttings that ended in October, to extend it out into November of next year. Looking at the bottom here, we did include here the capital projects that were originally asked for, but are not included in this budget. If you look at the bottom here, that totals about $397,000. Going over to page 3, the highway aid, we reduced the road project budget by $50,000 and put that into the maintenance of roads. So that's just a wash in the expense line item there.
Mr.
Any
Allen?
questions?
Mr. Scott?
It was originally budgeted in 2021, but from my understanding, there's issues with getting the equipment that they need, and it's not going to be completed by the end of this year. I'm sorry? It is on page. So if you look on page 12, under the Recreation Department's line item budget, you will see item 44568, transfer to capital. This number is $55,000. That's $45,000 for this Marshall Square equipment upgrade, as well as the $10,000 in the picnic benches. So on page 12, general ledger account number 44568, transfer to capital. It's about halfway down the page, kind of close to the bottom. Correct. Yes. So the project's not going to be completed in 2021, but we've earmarked money for that. So we are going to use what we call a cash reserve. So we're basically going to use the cash that we had from this year. So we have that on the revenue side, and then we have the expense. Correct. So the expense is the $10,000 and the $45,000. So we're not adding anything here. We're just taking what was already allotted in 2021, the cash. Okay. Correct. Page 19 is just kind of giving you the detail between what the number is on page 12. Yeah, the 44568 is the transfer to capital. So that is meaning what the recreation fund is going to be expending for capital projects in 2022.
Thank you. Are you completed?
Yes.
Thank you for your patience. Okay, moving on to the five-year capital plan. Mr. Sean Metrick.
Just to clarify, what we're looking for the committee in terms of the amendment to the preliminary budget is a recommendation. Finance director just went over tonight. The two things I'm going to talk about, I'm not looking for a recommendation for. One of our requirements is to talk about five-year capital budgeting. Present to you a plan, present to council a plan, present to public a plan, what we're going to do over the next 5 years. That fits in and whether we can. It's a really important thing for us to do, to look several years down and see where we're going to. Yeah.
print? I've got one. And I'm thankful to have had the extra month to think this one over and work out some of the details. So if you have your old presentation from last month, toss it in the recycle bin. I had a little more opportunity to go through this. And if you go to the first picture, I think a lot about like what my job's all about, what our jobs are all about, and what government does. I look at government as the entity that maintains the setting for all of this private activity that takes place, all this economic activity that takes place, community development activity. In this picture from I suppose it's taken from the garage, perhaps, and it shows streets, it shows sewers, it shows stormwater, it shows everything that the government does, maintains, and applies rules for and maintains infrastructure for to allow things like businesses to thrive, private enterprise for people to work, so on and so forth, and for this festival to take place that's in the picture. Next slide. What I've done is I tried to think of categories of types of projects to make the capital plan and budget legible, so people can know what types of things are we spending money on, what things do they fit in, and we came up with 8 categories. They're fairly self-explanatory, but I want to just maybe dwell on a couple of them. With administration, that would be anything that being done internally for IT, or anything with facilities and buildings. And we still have a little more work to do on the facilities. I use the word community facilities to describe parks and open spaces. So any improvements, if we were going to go buy those bollards, that would be space improvement. If we were going to make improvements in our parks, they would fall under that category. This just gives us a structure to talk about how we allocate dollars to capital fund. Look and see, are we weighted heavily in any one or more? And for some of these types of projects, we have restricted purpose funds that can fund them specifically. Can't be used for other things. Extreme protection, parking, and liquid fuels. You can only spend liquid fuels projects that would fall under that transportation and streets category. So going on to the next page, what I hope we get out of tonight's presentation not only is what we're up to this year, but how we're going to be doing this process going forward. I did this as best I could in PowerPoint to describe what was in my head. I think there needs to be a engagement with thinking about capital projects that goes through the whole year. Doesn't mean we're going to be talking about it every time we meet with council. There's a point where council will interact with the capital plan and budget, and that's around the appropriation cycle, which is where we're at right now. Dollars to do these capital projects. But I'd like there to be a process that really starts earlier in the year with commissions, with our staff, where we're surfacing projects that we want to do. There's a point in March or April where, for instance, if it's a park and open space project, the Rec Commission would create a list of projects it deems are due in the coming year. That then would give the staff 5 to 6 months to go out and get good budgets for the projects, get estimates if they're more involved, get a engineer involved to give us a good cost estimate for them, so that when we come to council in the fall, we have a good idea of what we're talking about, what it's going to cost, and we can give you the best information possible. And then only after a project has been appropriated in the next year's budget cycle do we go out and project out to bid and construction management phase. So the construction management phase is going to always be background as we do these projects, as we do the Marshall Square Park improve. But we're going to be going through this cycle of creating ideas and plans. They're going to be visible and legible to the public, all of our boards and commissions and staff. And there's going to be an internal process where we're doing to figure it out to you to appropriate for those projects around this time. And there's two opportunities for public input, the idea side early, boards and commissions, also get to this phase in the game. So I think that's a good process to set down, and I've started to coordinate with our chairs of our boards and commissions to talk about this and get their buy-in. And so far, we've gotten some Parks and Rec, which I'm out, but we're going to be talking to Shade Tree Commission as well about this. Slide has a chart for where we're giving up the dollars in next year, just to give you an idea of types of projects. All of these add up all of those dollars. That's all in your 2022 operating budget. How are we paying for these projects? If you go to the next slide, we have a mixture of general purpose funds. That's the capital improvement, $1,000 being transferred from the general to the capital fund on these projects, which is what Mr. Scott was just looking at. We have business type funds, the parking fund. It has the kiosk upgrades next year, as well as the roof coating on the garage. That's paid for. Business fund, the wastewater fund, those projects that are in the capital plan. Wastewater improvement, that's where that's coming from. And all those red accounts there are our restricted purpose funds, which includes our fire, stream protection funds, and listed grants for restricted purposes because they're usually specific to one project in the portfolio. So the borough's going to planning on spending a little over $4 million in 2022 on stuff, capital projects. And we will talk a little bit next about the ARPA funds. This is a unique opportunity to kind of leverage some of this investment. A couple more slides here. The next one, please. What have we been doing so far? Well, at least since 2016, the borough has been paying for its capital projects with cash on hand. You look at dollars going out of the operating right now, about 2/3 dollars that are being spent on capital projects are current cash. Back right away. About 1/3 of our capital projects right now are being financed, things we've already employed, but we're going to be. I don't know if it's good or bad news, but a lot of the debt that we do have on our books is very long-term debt. It's going to be here a while. It'll retire sometime in 2045, probably after I retire. But what we do find, and we'll talk about this a little bit next slide, is that we don't have enough current cash funding to cover capital planning in the next 5 years. But I have some ideas about that. American Rescue Plan Act is going to help with this, bridge some of these gaps, because we have about $2 million allocated in the forms of ARP, about $500,000. So there's one still to think about, time to think about it. We don't have to make the decision tonight, next week, about what we're going to do with that money, but I have a framework to think about that. An idea that also often comes up when I talk about officials or people in the public is, oh, go and get a grant to do that. There's a big grant tree that has apples on it. Pick it off and you can eat from it. It's very important that the borough have a recurring grant cycle, meaning that we know what grants are coming up, that we apply for them, know what we're doing. We know what's coming. We also have projects that are, I hate it, but I'll use it, shovel ready to go, plan, vetted and priced. But I don't expect the borough to ever exceed maybe 15%, maybe 20% of the dollars that it spends in any one year. But it's an important thing not to ignore, but keep in mind it's not a big needle mover. So let's just on to the last slide here. So what I've done is the last slide and the ones that follow it all work together. Every project you see under the last 5 pages, excuse me, 5 pages of the presentation feed into this summary page. So all of the administrative projects, for instance, in 2022 are summarized in that cell there at $70,000, those 4 projects, for instance. So you can look at just the summary sheet to see where we're trending year over year. And just go. Got it? So the budget is, the capital plan and budget is balanced for 2022. So when assuming the final budget gets approved, what you're approving, council would be approving spending. Execute the projects that are on the following page. In those out years, notice that the total expenditures, the top part of the chart, exceeds the total of the funding sources in the bottom of the chart. Not by a lot, but there's a difference there. The gap we have to bridge. We either have to move projects out, you have to find more funding, got to do less, one or the other. You can't do things you can't pay for, you can't spend money you don't. Also, I've put on in the administrative column in 2026 a new public works facility, just to let you know that capital programming, capital spending, remember what I said earlier, we're doing it with cash in hand. That works most of the time, except when the really big things come along. You got to borrow for the really big things. And you got to make sure you can take on the debt to do it, because capital spending can bounce around and all. That is coming down the pike. If borrow is, and I do think it's a good idea, and I agree with Mike's budget message that the facility, we are in need of a new public works facility. Have to do our research, make sure we know that that number is reasonable, correct, and then plan ahead for it, which is why I put it way out the right side of this chart. So let me go back for a second to, the process question too. I think it's one of the goals I want to reach when I'm planning for and budgeting for capital projects as I work here at the borough is to make sure that it's legible to the public and to council and to the staff what we're doing, so that we don't find out about capital projects in a newspaper article or in a Facebook post, or if we do hear rumors about something going on, somebody can easily, with a few clicks on our website, find out exactly what's going on, so that we're the source and authority of all the information about what's happening. Communication is a real big part of this, which is why I want to really keep working on our plan, our process for these ideas to council. Do you have any questions at this point about what I've talked about so far with this 5-year budget projection?
Mr. Allen?
I've been really, as being part of this committee, trying to understand the larger strokes, especially, which I think obviously is what this is about. And in my mind, I've kind of categorized this like spectrum of financial health is what I'll call it for a municipality. And on the poor side of that would be, a municipality that is borrowing money for everything they do as an extreme on one end. And in the middle would be more of what you're describing, where we're paying cash for what we're doing at the time we're doing it. And then it sounds like we're trying to become more healthy than that practice. And would that look like maybe like 10 years ago, recognizing that, hey, we might need a new public works building in 15 years. Let's start putting money away for that now, earn interest on that money, and potentially pay 75% of what we would have spent if we paid for it with cash on hand. Is that like, that's like obviously like a generational time frame. Like that would, I'm assuming would take a long time to get to that point. But in your mind, like, am I seeing that correctly? That like a really healthy municipality would look very far into the future and start putting away and somehow earn interest on that money, and then is that fair?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to think about when, in terms of funding capital projects. I'm a big fan of the more ahead of the wave you costs that are coming down the pike in a few years' time, the more prepared you'll be when they actually happen. Recognizing too that sometimes things break, sometimes Al, you work one day and there's sinkholes all over the borough that you have to fix. And fortunately, we're getting funding FEMA to defray some of those costs. There is always going to be a lot of risk in terms of managing an organization that is in charge of so much infrastructure. That risk quotient is yet. We need a better understanding of our facilities and state of repair and what we need to invest consistently over time to maintain operations in state of repair. I'm answering your question, but
I think you are. So when I think of that, like, would it maybe the question could be phrased like, we're looking to move in that direction of thinking further ahead so that we're financing fewer things? That's our goal with this 5-year plan, or maybe is a goal of the 5-year plan?
I don't think that paying for certain capital improvements with dollars that have been financed actually is a good thing. I never would have been able to move into my house if I didn't have a 30-year mortgage available to me. I could have bought it when I was 10 years from now if I had saved. So I don't see it. I don't know if this is what you're asking, but I don't see it in a black and white terms. I think there are appropriate moments to borrow, especially when rates are low. To your other point, if we have, and we do, have $8.4 million in the bank, and what can we do to make sure that money is earning 2.5% year over year term? How do we take that income stream and reinvest that back into our capital program? Create some relief for them.
Yeah, and that is another thing I'm worried about is with inflation. I just worry that we're just losing money or purchasing power, really.
And I think there was another good topic Williams always brings up with the sustainability department, that are we doing things at the right size and scale? Need pick vehicle fleet as one topic. Do we need this many to accomplish what we want to do? Mike suggested get more of a pooling our vehicle fleet, having one vehicle do multiple tasks. Does that make sense?
Mr. Scott, Mr. Scott.
Yes, we do. Ms. Leonti gave it to us, Mr. Perone gave it to us.
We have one, Bill, we update it every year with the budget.
Yeah. I can send it to you.
Let me let me answer that for you. Uh, the reason you have a 5-year projection, and it's been in the budget, council gets it every year since the home rule charter was put in, is because it says you have to have a 5-year capital plan approved by borough council every year. There has been very, very little work that's actually gone into it. It's not really not worth the paper it's written on, to be honest with you. What Sean's proposing to do is to do a deeper dive into budgeting long-term, or not long-term, five years and out, which is something we have never done. Nick brought up a perfect example is a public works facility. So here it is on a 2026. It's probably been 10 years ago that the borough actually hired an architect, developed plans to build a public works facility, the same location that our public works facility is today. We pulled the plug on it because it was too expensive. But it was never done. Plans are sitting on the shelf somewhere. And if we paid more attention to this type of financial planning, it would be a benefit to everyone.
American Rescue Plan. Yeah, yeah. You're stealing my thunder. That's my next presentation. Yeah. .38, 2020. Now that's a stream protection project, so that is a project that probably improves stormwater runoff quality, reduce stormwater volume. That's the general idea at this point in time. Yep, exactly. Correct. Correct. But what we are asking and what we're trying to come to a decision on is the spending that's going to happen next year. 22 column. Mr. Scott, you actually caught the thing that we need to amend, what I am presenting tonight, because we only just made this decision this morning about moving it into 2022. Correct, it should be listed on this page. Correct, yeah. But we intend to do that. No. Made that decision this morning, so. Yep. Yep. I'm going to tease Keith. He till the meeting day to give me the back. Go on. Okay. Okay, great. All right, we're going to talk about the American Rescue Plan. This has been out there for a little while, and a lot of people who are in my position, Mike's position, Barb's position, are scratching their heads. How does essentially about 10 to 15% of municipalities' budgets landed in our laps as a windfall from government in terms of they gave us a broad outline on what we can do with the money. So there's an interim final rule that was issued by U.S. Treasury, and that's the basis for our thinking about it right now. And Treasury is took all these public comments in, is going to issue a final rule about how this money can be spent. And that's going to be coming out, I think, momentarily prior to the end of the year. Correct. This link will take you right there. But any appropriation any municipality does under the interim final rule, as long as you follow those guidelines in the interim final rule, that appropriation is not going to be subject to Treasury. As long as we follow the rules that we already have, we should be in good standing. So I'm going to summarize a very long document in a few words here. You can't use the money to pad the pension fund, can't pad the general fund with it, you can't use it to reduce or avoid raising taxes, and you can't use it to pay off debt. You can use it to provide government services. Those include capital projects that you would be normally paying for with cash, right? Which is what we do mostly with our capital projects, and any extra costs you may have incurred as a result of COVID. That's my 30-second summary of what you can do with it. We can get into more details about it, but that's the basic framework of how we're thinking about what we can do with the money. And just like the capital plan, go on to the next slide, I wanted to think about that, we wanted to think about the types of projects we would do according to 5 different categories. Some of these are brick and mortar projects in our parks and in our streets. Some of these are public investments in our public safety capabilities, in our garages and in our downtown. And some of these are operational investments. They're going to help us do our jobs better. And they're going to help us return some of that money back to us on investment by reducing our costs, reducing our carbon footprint, operations smoother and more efficient. So that's the basic framework of what we want to do with the ARPA funding, the ARPA monies. And what I'd like to accomplish with this presentation and this idea is get buy-in from the committee about the framework I'm talking about, how we're spending the money. Maybe come back and revisit it again next month, getting into the details, and I'll have more to say about that in a second. So our goals, I just talked about those a little bit. we wanted to provide for a variety of project types. So I went and talked to our department heads. I made sure there was buy-in from most of our departments about what we wanted to do with the money. Want to meet the unmet financial need in our capital plan. This just showed you a capital plan that has a gap of roughly $200,000 in 23 and 24. ARPA funding is that gap. You can also use ARPA funding to cash fund capital projects that you were going to use general fund dollars for. So if you follow me here, you can get a little bit of relief of the pressure on the general fund. Because when we talked last month, we know that the general fund is under pressure year over year to spend more money to the tune of about $600,000 year over. We can use ARPA funding to take some of that steam out of the system. That would be helpful. I don't know if I'll ever have I'm 50 years old, so I don't know if I'll ever have another opportunity in my career. There's a big grant that comes down from Fed of this size to do pretty broad discretion, but basically what you want from the municipality. So I think it's important that we look at this not just to plug holes, fill gaps, but also to do things that we didn't have the money to do that will help us work efficiently and better in the future and save us money in the future. So I'm looking at this to use a portion of these funds in a transformational way. The tune of about 15 to 20% of that is being transformational operational projects. And that's in the next slide. That's our investment in next year's investment in geospatial technology, fleet and renewable electric infrastructure. So in the next year, that's actually a little bit more, 5%. The public, we'll get to the project specifics here in a second, because that's probably where everyone wants to know where the money's going. But our public safety improvements is about 60,000 next year. Streets and stormwater, 130. Parks and open space, $100,000. Don't have real good specifics for you yet about what all of those things are. We don't have it spelled out, not to my liking. But what we'd like to do is work with Finance Committee and work with Council to agree upon how the pie is getting divvied up. So for instance, if Council were to approve a $100,000 allocation limit from ARPA 22, work inside that framework of $100,000 next year. Anytime any dollar gets spent from ARPA, we would come to the Finance Committee, if that's how you set it up next year, to all of Council, get each one of those expenditures approved, which is kind of what we did this year with the Everhart Park project appropriation and the street sweeper repair and replacement appropriation. And that's kind of what got ahead of myself here on the next slide. That's the process I'm talking about. A little bit of a simpler process. We've come up with ideas about how we want to spend the money, some specific projects that we'll talk about here in just a second under those categories, but we'll be coming to you. So tonight or next month is not the moment that you bless the plan and you see it again. We'll be coming back next year. These expenses come up. Why don't we just skip the next slide and go to the one after that? Mr. Scott was asking about what have we spent on so far. So in the first column, 2021, half of the funds were deposited in an account. Total number that the borough will be allocated over this 4-year period is a little north of $2 million. 273 of which was 273 is right. 230. Number in the about that. Not missing something. Teamwork makes the dream work, right? That's what Don Andrew So I've got the wrong number in there, but we did allocate number to parks and open space and streets and stormwater. You see the 271 number, which is the appropriation for the repair and purchase of a new street sweeper, which you'll be hearing more from Mr. Venatelli next month. So in 2022, you can see across those categories, you see, yeah, please. It's already been authorized to spend. I don't think we've actually cut the checks yet, except for the repairs to the street sweeper. So I think all we've expended, actually gone out the door so far, is something north of like $14,000 for the street sweeper repair. We haven't been budgeting till now, talking about budgeting and planning expenditures. Any dollars in AR we've done to this point is come to council on 2 occasions to ask for an appropriation of those funds to those 2 purposes. But I'm hoping to create some framework around how we're going to talk about future expenditures, the other $1.5 million that's there. We built in Everhart Park, and street sweeper will be shortly. Mike's desk. Till this point, yes, it has been outside of our budget. So I'd like to take, I'd like to take some time, maybe come back to the committee next month if that's okay, and flesh out some more of these ideas. It bothers me that I put the wrong number. I want to get that right. What's that? No. I want to talk more about what these categories mean, prepare some remarks about the investment we want to make in geospatial technology. There was just to be clear, the downtown camera portion that we talked about at last month's meeting is included in $60,000 public safety. The reason it's a larger is that we also have a similar issue in our 2 garages where the information coming from those cameras and network aren't getting to our dispatch. It's not usable in real time, so we want to investigate that. I don't know if that's going to cost another $30,000 yet, so I'm just creating some room in there to make that work. But the more I want to talk about with the geospatial technology, I think in another month we'll have a better idea. I'm working with on the fleet structure issue. I'd like to work more Al and again Will on the streets and stormwater piece, and Keith and I have been collaborating on the parks and open space category piece too. But I don't think this is quite ready for advancement.
Okay, Mr. Allen?
Yeah, I make the same mistake every day in my math class. During one of my 5 classes, I will do that.
You'll flip around. Mr. Scott, are you satisfied up to tonight?
So we're going to get, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And, yeah, Mr. Metric will have that done in about 30 seconds because I know it's really bothering him. He'll have it done in 30 seconds because he inverted the numbers.
Here's the end of 2024.
Mr. Metric, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
What about the information?
We're not, that's not for tonight, believe me. It hasn't even left Washington DC, and he hasn't even, I don't even know if he signed it or not. So, thank you, Mr. Metric. Do we have any issues with the 2021 minutes? Oh, Mr. Mayor.
I would just like to thank administration and Borough Council for making the cameras work. So thank you very much.
It's a wonderful thing. Mr. Allen, do you have any problem with the minutes? Mr. Scott, any problem with the minutes?
Yep.
You have problems with them or no?
No,
Okay, very good.
Aye.
Any other business that we have to attend to? We started at 7:02. It is currently 8:41. We are adjourned.